He said, witches kill, life for a life, and they gain more power when they kill.
Bailey is innocent and I curse you all.
Oh, Jesus!
You know that I killed her.
A detective stood in the biting cold of a windswept prairie in the early morning hours. In their gloved hands, they held a large trash bag. Unbeknownst to them, inside that bag was the key to solving a several week-long mystery revolving around cults, vampires, sadism, and online dating. They unfurled the plastic, revealing a severed arm. The minute they laid their eyes on the dismembered remains, they knew who it belonged to. Etched into the skin of the bicep was a reminder to preserve, a tattoo that read, "Everything will be wonderful someday." That tattoo belonged to 24-year-old Sydney Loofe, who deserved that wonderful someday, but instead found herself at the center of one of the most heinous, mind-blowing cases of all time.
The women say Trail told them he was a vampire and that they could gain special powers as witches by torturing and killing someone.
There was strangulation involved. It was not supposed to go as far as it did, but it did.
Sydney Irene Loofe had always faced life and struggles with a smile. Born in Broken Bow, Nebraska in 1993, she moved to the even more rural town of Neely when she was a young kid. She spent her days playing in the creeks, outfishing her whole family, and bonding with her siblings Kenzie and Levi, who doubled as her best friends. Heading into high school, where her small graduating class was less than 30, she was well known for being a basketball standout. Her life revolved around her team, nature, her friends, and golf. Tragically, she was diagnosed with scoliosis halfway through high school, which made even swinging a golf club a painful challenge. Athletics, which had been her life, were snatched away from her, and as a result, she found herself struggling with anxiety and depression. In addition, she realized that she wasn't swooning over boys like most of her classmates. She found herself drawn to women, and by at least 2014, was identifying as a lesbian. At a time when same-sex marriage wasn't even legalized, she found herself in a wildly rural and conservative area. Soon after she graduated high school, she got a job at Menards as a head cashier and moved to Lincoln near her siblings in hopes of establishing a life for herself. Soon after she moved, she turned to Tinder, the dating app, in search of companionship. She visited her siblings nearly every day and doted on her cat Mimsy. But in a world surrounded by couples, she wanted and deserved someone to love. In early November 2017, she thought that person may be Audrey, a woman from nearby Wilbur, Nebraska. But Audrey didn't exist. Sydney matched with Bailey, or Audrey, and from there, sparks flew. They talked endlessly, swapping stories and jokes from the get-go over Tinder. It was a distraction and a light that Sydney needed in her life. Because on November 13th, Sydney went to a doctor's appointment with her parents' support. Her depression had recently been ramping up, and she wanted to start a new medication to see if it would help mitigate her symptoms. Sydney and her parents had a close enough relationship that Sydney felt comfortable turning to them for advice and comfort in hard times, and her parents were proud that Sydney was advocating for herself. They parted ways, hopeful this was a bright new beginning for Sydney. Little did her parents know, this would be the last time they would ever see their innovative, kind, hard-working daughter. Sydney went on her first date with the girl she believed to be Audrey on November 14th, 2017. Little is known about Sydney and Audrey's first date other than the fact that they went on a drive and seemed to enjoy their time together. Bailey, who was pretending to be Audrey, eventually posted her retelling of their first date on social media.
Hi, good morning. I'm Bailey, Audrey on Tinder, and a few other names because I have warrants, but this really isn't about me. This is about Sydney, and I'm just kind of want to tell you what I've already told the Lincoln police more than one time. I met her on a Tuesday. We drove around Lincoln, smoked weed, had a great time. We hit it off. I dropped her off at home.
However, it's important to note that Bailey is likely trying to paint a specific picture of Sydney here. It's a tactic she will continue to use, much to the heartbreak of Sydney's family. The next day, November 15th, 2017, Sydney made plans to meet with Bailey again. In their text, Sydney repeatedly asked if it would just be the two of them hanging out, and Bailey assured her it would be. But it wasn't just Bailey's name that she was lying about. Bailey didn't live alone in her apartment. She lived with her boyfriend, Aubrey Clifton Trail, who was 51 years old, more than double her age. Sydney wasn't going to be the first woman who had been lured into their home under false pretenses. Whatever purpose you think they brought women to their home for, the reality was much, much worse.
She says Trail told her he was a vampire and controlled 12 witches.
At around 10:25 a.m., security footage at a Home Depot near Sydney's job captured Aubrey and Bailey on a little shopping spree. Less than 24 hours before Sydney was murdered and dismembered, they were caught purchasing a foot-long saw, drop cloths, a sharp utility knife with backup blades, and wire cutters. But they weren't done yet. After this, they went to a nearby antique store where they purchased food grinders, a folding saw, and weed cutters. About an hour after the couple left the antique store with their horrifying haul in hand, they followed Sydney to her job at Menards. Aubrey went into the store alone, seemingly to scope out Sydney. Sydney had no idea that she was about to cross paths with her murderer. Aubrey looks back at Sydney over his shoulder. Investigators would come to believe that this was his chance to see her in person for the first time before he and Bailey set their plan into motion. At Menards, he purchased Drano, cotton cordage, protein bars, and lighters. Several hours later, Sydney would come into contact with Aubrey and Bailey again, only this time, it was at their apartment. Sydney's friends and family last heard from her when she posted this Snapchat story. She's beaming, clearly excited for her date with a woman she thought she may have a happy future with. Sydney's phone turned off forever at 8:31 p.m. on November 15th. The following morning, November 16th, Lincoln found itself bitter and blustery as the sun crept over the horizon. It was well below freezing. With Thanksgiving only a week away and the holiday season ramping up, Menards was in for a busy day. But they had a problem. Sydney, one of their opening cashiers, was nowhere to be found. Every call her coworkers made to her went to voicemail, and immediately they suspected something was wrong. Sydney was punctual and hardworking. She had never missed a day of work unannounced and was very close friends with several of her coworkers. One of them contacted Sydney's mother, who knew something must have happened to her. She sent a series of texts to her daughter to no avail. Upon searching her apartment, her family discovered that her car was sitting in the driveway, her cat hadn't been fed, and her purse was still inside. By the afternoon of the 16th, less than 24 hours after Sydney had disappeared, she was reported missing to police, and the investigation began in earnest. But it wasn't a seasoned investigator who made the first discovery that cracked open the case. It was Brooklyn McChrystal, Sydney's best friend of several years. Brooklyn knew that Sydney had met Audrey on Tinder and that was who she went on a date with the night she disappeared. Though Brooklyn provided police with that information, they suspected Audrey wasn't her real name, leaving them at a standstill. Brooklyn took it upon herself to make a Tinder account and match with Audrey. Just a few hours into making one, on November 17, 2017, Brooklyn did what she set out to do. She exchanged several messages with the Audrey account, flirting and planning a date until she finally convinced Audrey to give her her number. As soon as Brooklyn received that number, she passed it on to the police, who quickly discovered Audrey was actually Bailey Boswell. Even more revelatory was the fact that Bailey's address in Wilbur matched the final location where Sydney's phone pinged. As police scrambled to get their documents together to deliver a search warrant to Aubrey and Bailey's apartment in Wilbur, the couple's landlord was having problems of their own. On November 16th and 17th, the landlord and their family were choking on the strong smell of bleach emanating from Aubrey and Bailey's apartment. The vapors and the smell were so severe that one household member was vomiting and peppered with hives. In addition, Aubrey and Bailey had both fans and air conditioning running. This was highly suspicious, considering the average temperature was only 38 degrees over those 2 days. On the 19th, law enforcement delivered a search warrant to the address. By then, Aubrey and Bailey were nowhere to be seen. Police found themselves in an empty apartment that reeked of bleach and had clearly been wiped down to conceal evidence. A few days later, with Sydney still nowhere in sight, police officially labeled Aubrey and Bailey persons of interest. They didn't take it well.
Good morning, Lincoln and Omaha and probably several other places. This is Aubrey Trail and this is Bailey Boswell. I guess y'all also know her as Audrey. But we've spent the last few days watching ourselves being slammed and crucified in the newspapers and the news and everything else, so we thought it was time we had our say. We're not trying to defend anything. We're not trying to make you believe anything. We just feel we should get to say our side since everyone else gets to say theirs. Unlike the Lincoln Police Department and Saline County Police Department and all those folks, everything we're going to tell you, you're going to be able to pick up the phone or have a newspaper pick up the phone and very easily verify it.
This video was posted publicly on Facebook in an attempt to defend themselves, but in reality, it did the opposite. Aubrey Trail's criminal history is much more extensive than he's making it out to be. When he was just a teen, he was put into a facility for armed robbery. Throughout the rest of his years, he was jailed on multiple occasions for forgery, theft, and writing worthless checks. He would often target small antique dealers, buy items with fake checks, and then sell the items he stole online for more money. He wasn't alone in his criminal history, however. 23-year-old Bailey had quite a past herself. Oddly enough, a sweet, amazing girl is how many would have described Bailey just a few short years before this incident. Despite her father being murdered when she was just an infant, Bailey flourished in high school in her small hometown of Leon, Iowa. She was a successful athlete, even earning a scholarship to play basketball in college. But all that came tumbling down soon after she graduated. To cope with an allegedly toxic relationship, she turned to substance use. Soon after she began the relationship, she had a daughter with the soon-to-be husband. Over the next few years, she racked up multiple charges for possession. When her daughter was a toddler, she was removed from Bailey's custody due to her and her husband's substance use. From there, Bailey was desperate to escape her relationship and build a new life for herself. She went on Backpage, a long-gone site where people advertised escort services. She found Aubrey there, and soon he became her sugar daddy. The two shared a disdain for law enforcement, as you're about to see in the final moments of the 9-minute-long video they posted on Facebook. Despite their claims that they weren't on the run, law enforcement soon located the couple hiding in a budget hotel in Branson, Missouri, 6 hours south of Lincoln. They had sleeping bags, hiking shoes, wads of cash, and a map outlining a route to Mexico. Initially, the couple was taken into custody on warrants unrelated to Sydney's disappearance. This allowed law enforcement to extradite the couple to Nebraska, where their interrogation began in earnest. As the pair was questioned, the FBI worked to trace their phone records to the day that Sydney disappeared. Using forensic analysis to determine what towers their phones utilized at what times, they determined that the couple had spent a long span of time in one specific location. That led investigators to a rural field north of Edgar, Nebraska, about an hour outside of Lincoln. It was a desolate area with nothing but golden prairies for miles. As soon as law enforcement saw an array of trash bags littering the side of the gravel roads, their hearts sank. Strewn across an extensive area covering 17 separate sites were dozens of 30-gallon trash bags. Inside, they discovered Sydney's body, which had been dismembered into 14 parts. To this day, only 13 of those parts have been recovered. The marks where her body had been dismembered were consistent with the teeth on the saw that Bailey and Aubrey had purchased the day Sydney disappeared. Sydney's internal organs had been removed, and her head displayed signs of abrasions and trauma. Her one arm that was recovered, the arm with the tattoo, showed signs that she had been restrained against her will. Along with the bags were several items of clothing, trash, and more distressing, handcuffs, adult toys, a leash, rope, and a dog collar. It was clear that Sydney had faced a horrible death. Though her friends and family were initially spared the details, their grief was immense. Justice was on the horizon with Bailey and Aubrey in custody. But would they confess to any involvement and give the family peace? It would take several weeks and several convoluted stories before the truth would come out. Initially, Aubrey continued with their claim that they had dropped Sydney off at a friend's house. When Sydney's phone analysis revealed that that wasn't the case, he changed the story, stating first that Sydney accidentally died of health causes, and then stating that she accidentally died as a result of sex gone wrong. He told law enforcement that Sydney had consensually engaged in rough sex with Bailey and himself, and that during choking that Sydney insisted he perform, things took a turn. It was during these interrogations, and interrogations with Aubrey's former lovers, that a twisted picture began to emerge. Aubrey was running a cult of sorts, which himself and the members referred to as the Vampire Daddy Sex Cult. Aubrey would find women on Backpage and agree to support them financially if they joined his group of witches. Bailey, his main partner, was referred to as the Queen Witch. In this group, he had a set of rules for the women in exchange for their financial stability. The women had to ask him permission before they did anything. They had to check in every 3 hours. They couldn't speak with any other men. Lastly, they had to be naked at all times in the presence of Aubrey. In addition, the women, who were largely young, vulnerable women struggling with addiction and homelessness, were ordered to call him Daddy or Vampire Sugar Daddy. As time went on, Aubrey's strange demands for the group increased in severity. He told the woman that to be a full witch, they had to kill another person and breathe in their last breath.
He said, witches kill, life for a life, and they gain more power when they kill.
One woman who escaped the cult told law enforcement that she went with Aubrey to Walmart at some point and picked out a woman that they were going to kill together. Soon after, they got cold feet and never moved forward with killing the stranger. Aubrey reportedly threatened to kill the women and their families if they told anyone what the group was doing, which is a common tactic used by dangerous and manipulative partners. On June 11, 2018, both Aubrey and Bailey were formally charged with first-degree murder and improper disposal of human remains. Aubrey eventually confessed to strangling Sydney with an electrical wire that was discovered on the desolate highway where her body was disposed of. Aubrey seemed to be willing to take all the blame for the crime, denouncing the notion that Bailey was involved in any way. But on June 23, 2018, things changed, and all hell broke loose in the courtroom. After claiming he was innocent of killing Sydney, Aubrey sliced open his own throat with a concealed item. He was rushed out of the courtroom, bleeding profusely. Aubrey recovered from his injuries and returned to court soon after. Throughout the trial, his main goal was to avoid a death sentence. However, in June 2021, a jury agreed in just a couple of hours to find Aubrey guilty and sentence him to death by lethal injection. Bailey's defense team claimed that she had been manipulated by Aubrey and that she only went along with his plan because she was forced to. Her family pleaded for her life, telling the jury that their daughter had been struggling emotionally for several years and that she had had her own daughter to live for. When asked what would happen to Bailey's daughter if Bailey received the death penalty, her father responded,
It'll be back. I'll have to explain it. I don't know how to do it.
Bailey was sentenced to life in prison, where she remains to this day. At the publishing of this video, Aubrey remains incarcerated on death row. Sydney's family and the communities of Nebraska have band together to create parks and benches in her memory, urging people to spend time in nature just like Sydney loved to.